Our story begins with the destruction of Ragnar's castle, known as Rose Palace. The people of the palace, servants, guards, and knights, are killed one by unknown assailants. They are hopelessly cut down, while our protagonist, Theo Ragnar, struggles to stand against one of the enemies. Theo swings his sword upward, forcing his opponent back. The man raises his sword and brings it down, but Theo manages to block the strike just in time. The Ragnar clan is a Grand Ducal family responsible for guarding the empire's northernmost borders. Their power comes from a unique constitution said to be inherited from dragons. For over 1,000 years, the Ragnar clan has served as the empire's great northern wall. Every member of the Ragnar bloodline is born with extraordinary magic, stamina, and skill in swordsmanship, everyone except Theo Ragnar. Despite his lineage, Theo possesses none of the talents that define his family. In the midst of battle, Theo is stabbed in the stomach and falls to his knees. His opponent taunts him, saying that, even at the end, Theo still doesn't understand. He tells Theo that no matter how hard he tries, there are some things he simply cannot achieve. People call it a lack of talent. The man then removes his mask, revealing himself as Rendon, someone Theo knows. Shocked, Theo demands to know why Rendon has done this. Rendon, unfazed, mocks Theo further. He says it was pitiful to watch Theo train every morning, knowing that all his effort would never get him anywhere. Rendon laughs cruelly, telling Theo that he was the perfect imbecile of Ragnar, someone who should have stayed hidden away because he had no talent. Rendon found it laughable to watch Theo struggle to make something of himself. Anger surges through Theo as he clenches his teeth and forces himself to stand. He demands to know if Rendon only became his sword instructor to betray him and sell out Rose Palace. In response, Rendon slashes Theo's arm, causing him to scream in pain as his blood splatters everywhere. With a sigh, Rendon asks why Theo blames him. He grabs Theo's hair, pulling his head up, and tells him that everything happening is his own fault. Rendon questions why Theo can't see it. With blurred vision, Theo hears Rendon tell him to look ahead and understand why Rose Palace is burning and why his family is dying. Another man approaches, dragging a woman and throwing her at Theo's feet. Rendon cruelly asks why his mother has become a cold, lifeless corpse. Theo is stunned and horrified to see his mother dead in front of him. Rendon tells him once more that all of this is happening because Theo is the weakest in the Ragnar clan, a clan ruled by strength. In his anguish, Theo whispers Rendon's name, grabs the sword in front of him, and swings it in a fury. But before he can strike, a sword is thrown at him, stabbing him in the chest. He falls to the ground. As blood pools beneath him, the man beside Rendon scolds him for talking too much and orders him to finish the job. Rendon apologizes, saying he was merely reminiscing but is nearly done. Theo, lying on the ground, wonders what Rendon means by done. Is this truly the end? Regret washes over him as he realizes he couldn't protect anyone or accomplish anything. As everything burns around him, he wonders if things would have been different if he had only possessed talent. Tears fall from his eyes as he closes them in pain, consumed by the flames alongside his servants, his mother, and the place he loved. Suddenly, a system message appears: you have died. Your trait has activated, and you are returning to the regression point. Theo opens his eyes, confused, to find himself face to face with Rendon once again, who casually remarks that he seems tired. Rendon suggests they end the lesson for the day, but Theo is stunned and disoriented. He doesn't respond, wondering if what he just experienced was real. Did he really die? Rendon, noticing Theo's silence, comments on how absent-minded he seems. Theo, lost in thought, wonders if his death was real and if he is now flashing back to his life. He can't believe that Rendon's face, of all things, is what he's seeing in these final moments. With a sigh, he thinks that even death has a cruel sense of humor. But then, a system message pops up in front of him. It reads, Tutorial Quest Number 1, Punch Rendon in the face. Theo looked at Rendon, wondering what in the world was happening. Was this really how flashbacks were supposed to work? He glanced back and forth between Rendon and the system message, quickly realizing that Rendon couldn't see it. Rendon asked him what was wrong, but Theo, still in shock, let go of his wooden sword. His fist trembled as he thought that, despite not understanding what was going on, perhaps this was a gift from the gods, a chance to vent his frustration before it was all over. With that thought, Theo launched his fist at Rendon, thinking that if this was a dream, he might as well give Rendon a good pummeling. His punch landed squarely on Rendon's face, stopping everyone in their tracks. But to Theo's surprise, the punch didn't even hurt Rendon. He was left wondering why the dream felt so real, yet his punch was so weak. Rendon, unfazed, swung his wooden sword forward and struck Theo in the shoulder, sending him flying to the ground. As Theo slammed into the dirt, Rendon scolded him, reminding him that he had said their lesson was over. Theo winced in pain, confused. Was he supposed to feel pain in a dream? Rendon sighed and told him that he understood Theo's frustration, especially with the awakening ceremony fast approaching. But that didn't excuse a student lashing out at his master. Theo was taken aback. Awakening ceremony. What was Rendon talking about? Disappointed, Rendon added that as a member of the Ragnar family, Theo should have used his sword, not his fists. Rendon then walked away, telling Theo that he would see him at their next lesson. But Theo remained seated, lost in thought, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The nearby knights snickered and taunted him, calling him an imbecile. They mocked him for attacking his master and questioned if he was even truly a Ragnar, saying he was too incompetent even for an illegitimate child. Theo touched his face, feeling the lingering pain, and grabbed a handful of sand. He couldn't believe how real the sensations were. It wasn't a flashback. This was reality. He recalled that the awakening ceremony was supposed to take place 10 years ago, which made him wonder if he had somehow returned to when he was 17. How was this even possible? Just then, the system appeared again, congratulating him on completing tutorial quest number 1. As a reward, it informed him that his Ragnar's talent had been activated. Theo was confused, staring at the system message, but when it asked if he wanted to claim his reward, he hesitantly raised his hand and clicked yes. Immediately, a bright light surged from his body, and the system displayed that his stats were increasing at an incredible rate. Bewildered, Theo could only wonder what the hell is going on. Later, in Rose Palace, in the guest room, Rendon Harvey, Theo's swordsmanship tutor, reports on Theo's progress. He comments that he has never seen someone so devoid of talent, but adds that this is precisely why he is there, the true teacher, Rendon. He swears that he will do his best to prepare Theo for the awakening ceremony, which is only 5 months away. Lady Cecilia Ragnar, the mistress of Rose Palace and Theo's mother, agrees with Rendon, entrusting Theo's training to him. She hands him a bag of gold coins, asking Rendon to give Theo a bit more attention. Rendon replies confidently, assuring her that he already plans to teach Theo day and night, so she needn't worry. Cecilia, however, clarifies that she isn't concerned because she believes in Theo. As Rendon leaves the guest room, he mutters to himself that Cecilia will have to worry. Although he isn't truly training Theo properly, it's still true that Theo lacks talent. He scoffs, calling Cecilia a concubine and thinking to himself that like mother, like son, their bloodline won't lead anywhere. Still, Rendon finds the situation ideal. He's receiving an excellent salary and has the title of tutor to the Ragnar family's direct line. As a reward for secretly sabotaging Theo's growth and feeding information to a mysterious benefactor, Rendon knows his future is secure. He smirks, thinking that Theo, the imbecile of Ragnar, will unwittingly be his ticket to success. Suddenly, Rendon spots someone running toward him at high speed. It's Theo. Rendon sneers, calling him the imbecile, but Theo runs past him without a word. Angered, Rendon mutters, calling Theo an idiotic loser. Theo rushes to the guest room and calls out to his mother. Cecilia, looking up, smiles sweetly and comments that he must be tired from training. But instead of answering, Theo throws his arms around her, hugging her tightly. Surprised, Cecilia stammers, asking why he's acting this way. Tears well up in Theo's eyes as he confirms to himself that he truly has returned to 10 years in the past. He vividly recalls Rendon forcing him to look at his mother's dead body in his previous life, helpless to do anything. But now, he feels immense joy to see her alive. Cecilia, confused, looks down at her son. Theo knows he must change the future. He's still weak and powerless at the moment, but if that mysterious system window is real, he can become strong enough to hold his own in the inevitable war for the throne. Hugging his mother tightly, he silently vows to become strong enough to exact revenge on Rendon. At that moment, the system displays his second tutorial quest, Train Your Body to the Limit. Determined, Theo heads to the training ground, running laps with a singular focus, revenge against Rendon. However, he knows that with his current weak body, he can't do anything. He must prioritize getting stronger first. As he runs, he remembers the intelligence agency he became involved with in his previous life, Black Word. Although he had been relegated to the information team due to his lack of skill, he never expected that the information he gathered back then would become so useful now. That information was about a powerful elixir known as the Bloody Sword Emperor's Elixir. Its true value would only be revealed in the future through a secret manual, and Theo realizes that, combined with extreme training, it might be his key to strength. Hours pass, and as the sun begins to rise, Theo is still running, not having rested once. Yet, he feels strong, thinking that everything is possible now because of his activated Ragnar talent and the system window. The system shows him that he has made 27% progress toward his goal of 100%. One of the knights training nearby notices Theo and asks how many laps he has completed without a break, remarking that Theo seems far fitter than before. Theo grabs a nearby wooden sword, determined to push himself harder. He resolves to run as far as he can and swing the sword more than he ever has before. Only then can he truly become powerful this time. As he trains, the system updates his progress. He has reached 65% of his goal. A few days later, Theo was still in the training ground, relentlessly swinging his sword without rest. Evelyn Narival, the manager of training ground number 4, sat at the top, yawning with a cigar in hand. She noticed that Theo had been training non-stop for several days and wondered if he was truly the imbecile of Ragnar as people said. Staring at him, she began to doubt whether someone so dedicated could really be talentless. Theo, on the other hand, was completely exhausted, barely catching his breath, and felt as though he was going to die. But when the system displayed that he had reached 97% completion, he forced himself to keep going, pushing his body to its absolute limit. He remembered the night before when, after reaching 90% progress, he had laid down briefly to rest. To his shock, the percentage had dropped. He hadn't expected the system to penalize him for taking a break, and it pushed him to keep moving without rest until morning. Despite his disbelief, the system had goaded him into continuing until he could no longer breathe. Hours later, as he hit 98%, Theo ran forward with the wooden sword, swinging it forcefully. Knowing he was almost there, he pushed harder, jumping around the training ground with increasing speed. As he reached 99%, he summoned every last ounce of strength, convincing himself that he just needed a little more. Evelyn watched in disbelief, her mouth open, as Theo pushed through his pain and exhaustion. Finally, he reached 100%. The moment he saw the number appear, he stopped, completely losing his balance from the overwhelming fatigue. While the system congratulated him on completing tutorial quest number 2, the system displayed his rewards and bonuses, but his vision was so blurred that he couldn't make them out. He collapsed to the ground, trembling, as the system asked if he wanted to claim his rewards now. Without seeing them clearly, Theo reached out with a shaking hand and managed to click yes. As soon as he did, he passed out, while a brilliant light entered his body. A powerful gust of air surged around him, and Evelyn, witnessing the event, was shocked. Later, Theo woke up, immediately sitting upright when he realized he was in a room. Evelyn entered and reassured him, explaining that he was in the break room of training ground number 4. She added that even a Ragnar would collapse if they pushed themselves as hard as he had. He recognized her, which surprised Evelyn, though she introduced herself properly. She explained that he had lost consciousness while training alone in the morning, so she had moved him there to recover. Theo thanked her, understanding the situation. Evelyn handed him a glass of water, then asked if he knew that within the Ragnar clan, opening one's mana hall before the awakening ceremony was strictly forbidden. Theo, still confused, replied, yes. Evelyn then pressed further, saying that he should also be aware of the consequences of breaking that rule. Theo, puzzled, asked why she was suddenly bringing this up. Evelyn's tone grew serious as she explained that right before he lost consciousness, a mana wave had occurred, one that aligned with the opening of a mana hall. Theo was taken aback, and she asked if he had perhaps opened his mana hall, addressing him as young Master Theo Ragnar. Theo was left wondering what she meant by this, knowing that if he had opened his mana hall, he shouldn't have survived. But then, he felt something within him and recalled the system notification. He had obtained a dragon heart as a reward. He also remembered that as a bonus reward for his fast completion of the quest, he had received the magic power equivalent to 10 years of his past life. Stunned and in disbelief, Theo couldn't fathom that he now possessed a dragon heart. Dragon heart. A mana hall can be placed within a dragon's heart, and doing so makes it operate far more efficiently. However, humans, not being dragons, place their mana halls in the lower abdomen because the human heart cannot handle the burden. This is why every warrior, especially those like the Ragnar clan, longs for a dragon's heart. It's seen as a shortcut to overwhelming power. But humans have never been able to overcome their natural limitations, until now. With the dragon heart granted to Theo, he found himself in a precarious situation. Theo knew that Evelyn Narival was no ordinary person. A high-rank swordsman, she had retired after losing her left arm and now managed training ground number 4. However, she had once been the commanding officer of the white-armored dragon cavalry, so respected that even the demon dragon of the cavalry adored her. She was renowned for her principles, not caring for status or strength, and she could not tolerate dishonesty or cowardice. Theo recalled that, in his previous life, when he had been stubborn, Evelyn had relinquished her position as his direct master. In other words, if Evelyn discovered the truth about his dragon heart and the mana hall within it, she would report him for execution without hesitation. But then Theo smirked, wondering if he could outmaneuver her without getting caught. In a calm but serious tone, Theo asked Evelyn if she could handle the consequences of accusing him, an heir of Ragnar, of breaking such a grave rule based solely on her suspicions. Her momentary feelings could lead to his execution, but her principles might also trap her. Evelyn, stunned, listened as Theo reminded her that if she were wrong, accusing him without proof would mean defiling the Ragnar name, to which she agrees. When he seriously asked her what the punishment was for such a crime, she replied, read execution. Theo praised her knowledge of the rules and provocatively suggested she go ahead and check for herself. Evelyn, unnerved, studied his expression, uncertain about what she was feeling. Could Theo really be that kind of person? She released her power, convinced there had been a mana wave, and angrily prepared to check his abdomen, believing there could be no exceptions to the rules. But when she looked, there was no mana hall. Confused, she started to wonder if she had been mistaken. Still, the possibility seemed impossible to her. Theo, seeing her confusion, casually asked, "Is there no mana hall?" Realizing her error, Evelyn immediately knelt before him, shouting for him to execute her as punishment for her wrongful accusation. She explained that she had been wrong and would pay for her sin with her life. But Theo, smiling, knew there could be no mana hall visible because dragon hearts were different. A dragon heart's mana hall could be controlled and hidden at will by its user, and since the fact that humans could possess a dragon heart wouldn't be known for several years, Evelyn would never suspect the truth. Theo reached out to her, but instead of punishing her, he simply tapped her shoulder and told her there was no need for such actions. This shocked Evelyn. As Theo turned to walk away, he calmly remarked that she had done what she thought was right, and that there were few people brave enough to risk their life to demand the truth from an heir of Ragnar. Theo recognized Evelyn's strength and realized it would benefit him to erase her debt to him. He then explained to her that the reason opening one's mana hall before the ceremony was forbidden was out of fear that it might overflow. He added that it was kind of amusing that she had been worried about him, the so-called bastard of Ragnar, overflowing his mana hall. He thanked her for her concern and care, leaving her stunned, the cigar still unused in her mouth. As Theo walked out of the training grounds break room, he thought about his dragon heart and the 10 annuals, or 10 years worth of magic power from his past life, that the system had given him. He was now certain that he could become overwhelmingly powerful in this life. A few days later, Rendon shouted at Theo, telling him that his sword swing wasn't right, and that he needed to adjust it more to the right. Rendon, growing frustrated, asked how many times he had to repeat himself. Theo thought it was nice that he was getting stronger, but pretending to be weak while enduring Rendon's lessons was exhausting. He glanced at Rendon, calling him a bastard in his mind, realizing that Rendon was subtly, yet deliberately, teaching him flawed sword techniques. As Rendon tried to adjust his grip, Theo became more certain that there was someone pulling the strings behind Rendon's actions. He knew he had to uncover the identity of the mastermind behind his murder. Suddenly, an idea came to Theo, and he smiled, confident that he could handle the situation. He called out to Rendon, who quickly snapped, reminding Theo that chatting during lessons was prohibited. Before Rendon could finish his scolding, Theo snapped the wooden sword in his hands and calmly told him that he couldn't continue with the lesson because it was utter nonsense. Angry, Theo demanded to know how Rendon had managed to become a mid-rank swordsman with such poor skills, speculating that his commission had likely been to act as Theo's instructor to keep an eye on him. Theo continued, mockingly suggesting that Rendon would struggle even against low-rank demonic beasts. Rendon, visibly shaking with anger, asked Theo to repeat what he had just said. But Theo doubled down, stating clearly that Rendon's skills were garbage. As Theo considered the situation, he thought that the best course of action was to force Rendon to resign. Rendon, furious, shouted, calling Theo young master in frustration. But Theo remained calm, believing that if things escalated, Rendon would have to contact the mastermind. Later, at Camellia Palace, a knight excitedly called out to someone named Action, asking if he had heard the news that the bastard of Ragnar was set to duel his instructor next week. Action, unimpressed, grabbed his glass of alcohol and threw it at the knight. The glass shattered against the knight's face, causing him to scream in pain before collapsing unconscious. Action Ragnar, one of the 4 hounds of the north, known as the Dark Tiger, furiously asked what it mattered if a so-called bastard ended up half-disabled. Next to Action, Remington Narcio, the Silver Lion, remained silent. At that moment, another person entered, warning Action that he should care. The 9 Dragons Sky Dragon, Ed Troyven, cautioned Action that things might take a turn if they let their guard down. Action dismissed his uncle's concerns, insisting that only people with talent were worth worrying about. Remington respectfully bowed to Ed, while Action asked why Ed was concerned about Theo. Ed replied that when it came to the Ragnar clan, even the smallest possibility could lead to something unprecedented. He warned that a small flame in the wind could spark a wildfire at any moment. Action, however, reassured Ed that their instructor would handle the situation. A week later, at training ground number 4, the knights gathered to occupy the stage, with Evelyn and another important figure present to watch the duel. Theo stood on the stage, holding a real sword, quietly cursing under his breath. His initial goal had been to humiliate Rendon and get him fired. But things had spiraled out of control. The crowd cheered as both Theo and Rendon took the stage. Theo thought that, given how far things had escalated, he might as well seek revenge. At that moment, the system displayed his third tutorial quest, fight Rendon and win. A week earlier, when Theo confronted Rendon by telling him his swordsmanship was trash, he also fired him on the spot, ordering him to get lost. Furious, Rendon called after him as Theo walked away, shouting that he couldn't accept the dismissal since there was still plenty of time left on his contract. But Theo simply asked, "What about the contract?" and told Rendon that, as his employer, if he says he's fired, then he's fired. Though Theo wanted to beat Rendon to death considering their history in his past life, he wasn't confident enough in his skills yet. His plan was to separate from Rendon and dig up more information on him first. Rendon, on the other hand, knew that if he was fired like this, his mission would end in failure. He needed to convince Theo to let him stay. Desperate, Rendon ran after him, begging Theo to reconsider and warning that this went against the rules. As he did, the system appeared in front of Theo, showing his third tutorial quest. Meanwhile, Rendon threatened that if he reported the firing to the tribunal, things could get ugly for Theo. Suddenly, Evelyn appeared and suggested an alternative. She proposed resolving the issue the Ragnar way, which shocked both Rendon and Theo. Theo asked if she meant what he thought she did, and she confirmed, yes, they should settle it by a sword match, as per the rule of the strong. Evelyn added that there was no need to involve the tribunal, the victor of the duel would decide. Rendon, excited by the idea, eagerly agreed, thinking the heavens were on his side. Evelyn then declared that the duel would take place in 1 week, leaving Theo stunned. She smiled, asking if they agreed it was fair, but Theo, unable to speak out loud, could only think to himself that it was not all right. He glanced at Rendon, who confidently smirked at him, fully aware that Theo wasn't yet capable of defeating him. Back in the present, 2 knights chatted nearby. A black-haired knight mentioned hearing that Theo couldn't even swing his sword properly yet, to which a brown-haired knight responded in disbelief, asking if Theo wasn't still a Ragnar at the very least. The black-haired knight laughed and replied that Theo wasn't a normal Ragnar, he was the Ragnar cripple, and there was no way he could beat a mid-rank swordsman like Rendon. On the stage, Rendon smiled smugly at Theo, offering him a chance to back down. He said that if Theo apologized now, he would forget everything, and there was no need for Theo to risk his life over his pride. Theo, however, retorted that he should be the one saying that. He warned Rendon that if he didn't want to lose an arm, it would be best to accept that he was fired. Rendon was infuriated by Theo's audacity. He had considered letting Theo off because he pitied him, but now he decided to kill him, pretending it was an accident. In Rendon's mind, the outcome of the duel was already decided, and it would actually work out better for him this way. With a smirk, Rendon invited Theo to make the first move, stating that as his teacher, he would graciously concede the opening strike. Theo dashed forward, shouting that he wouldn't hesitate. Rendon positioned himself and blocked Theo's attack, the clash of their swords ringing loudly. Moments later, the audience of knights stood up in shock, murmuring in disbelief. They watched as Rendon attacked Theo with a series skillful slash. The crowd started shouting, jeering that they had expected this. Theo, the imbecile, was clearly losing. They ridiculed his inability to properly wield a sword, speculating that at this rate, Theo might actually die. Theo, blocking Rendon's attacks, mocked him, teasingly asking what had happened. He shouted at Theo, reminding him that he was a mid-rank swordsman, the very type Theo had looked down on, and taunted him for being so hopeless in the duel. Rendon thought the outcome was obvious. Theo wasn't even a low-rank swordsman, just an apprentice. While Theo's skills had strangely improved recently, it still wasn't enough. If Theo were at the level of the 4 Hounds of the North, it might be a different story. But there was no way the imbecile of Ragnar could defeat him, Rendon was sure of that. Theo, however, remained calm. He recalled visiting Evelyn's office earlier to ask what she had been thinking when she suggested the duel. Evelyn had replied that she was helping him because, if Theo wanted to truly get rid of Rendon, he had to be thorough. She explained that Rendon likely had someone backing him, so simply firing him wouldn't solve the problem. Surprised, Theo asked how she knew, and Evelyn revealed that she had secretly investigated Rendon after noticing his odd teaching style. Weeks before, Evelyn had been observing Theo in the training ground when Rendon had shouted at him to angle his sword in a bizarre, exaggerated manner. Evelyn, suspicious of such a ridiculous instruction, had someone look into Rendon's background, which led her to believe there was more at play. She wondered to herself where this son of a bitch had come from, as it certainly wasn't the behavior of a competent swordsman. Theo realized that Evelyn hadn't uncovered this in his previous life, and he wondered if the recent incident with his Mana Hall had piqued her interest. Evelyn put down her tea and revealed that all of Rendon's traces led back to Camellia Palace, which shocked Theo. He seethed with anger, suspecting the conspiracy was tied to the miserable war for the throne. But he calmed down, admitting that it was impressive Evelyn had discovered so much. He also confessed that, despite everything, he wasn't yet strong enough to defeat Rendon. He asked what Evelyn intended to do now. Evelyn, however, told him that he was underestimating himself and that he could indeed beat Rendon. Back in the present, Rendon approached Theo with a mocking grin, shouting that if Theo knelt and begged for forgiveness now, he might spare him. Rendon swung his sword with great force, but to his surprise, Theo blocked the strike. Rendon felt a growing unease, something was off. Theo glared at him in anger and swung his sword, pushing Rendon's blade aside. Rendon realized, with mounting concern, that Theo had been fending off his attacks for a while now. This wasn't the Theo Ragnar he knew. Rendon, bewildered, swung his sword again, wondering how Theo's skills had improved so much in such a short time. But once again, Theo effortlessly pushed his blade away. The audience gasped in disbelief. Rendon was being pushed back by the very person they had all thought was hopeless. Among the spectators, Remington silently observed the unfolding duel. Evelyn smiled as she watched the scene, recalling her conversation with Theo. She had told him that if she trained him personally for just 1 week, he'd be able to suppress someone like Rendon easily. She had also remarked that Rendon, being a disgrace of a teacher, had no rights as an instructor. Theo had smiled at the time, amazed that things were working out in his favor. He knew that having Evelyn in his debt had been worthwhile. However, one thing still concerned him. Theo had asked Evelyn why she was going so far to help him. Was it because of what had happened last time? Evelyn admitted that was part of it, but also revealed that there was someone she knew, someone obsessed with collecting talent, who would likely take an interest in Theo. Rendon swung his sword backward, preparing to attack with great force, but Theo easily blocked the strike. Panic set in as Rendon struggled to understand how Theo, who had shown no talent from the beginning, could suddenly perform so well. Rendon began to wonder if Theo had been pretending to be weak all along. As Rendon pushed harder, trying to overpower him, he questioned why Theo had hidden his abilities. Theo then asked Rendon who was backing him, causing a wave of shock to wash over Rendon. In a fit of anger, Rendon swung his sword in a wide arc, furious and demanding an explanation for Theo's accusation. Theo, barely pushed by the attack, calmly mentioned that he had noticed the substandard lessons Rendon had been giving him. Rendon, feeling cornered, insisted that he had worked hard to help Theo, but Theo cut him off, suggesting that Camellia Palace might be involved. Rendon froze, momentarily speechless, wondering how Theo had uncovered this. Seeing Rendon's hesitation, Theo smiled, pleased that his assumption had hit the mark. Theo then leapt forward with intensity, questioning whether Rendon knew what it felt like to lose an arm. Before Rendon could react, Theo sliced through Rendon's arm in a single, decisive strike. Rendon watched in shock as his severed arm flew into the air. The spectators, including Remington, were stunned by what they had just witnessed. Rendon collapsed, screaming in pain as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. Despite the agony, Rendon angrily hurled insults at Theo. But Theo, growing more confident in his newfound strength, walked closer, reflecting on how far he had come. He thought back to the time when Rendon had blamed him for being weak and now considered how the tables had turned. Theo reminded Rendon of their previous encounter, pointing out that Rendon had once told him it was his fault that events had unfolded the way they had. Now, Theo coldly added that it was Rendon's fault he was dying here today. Memories of his own hopeless past flooded Theo's mind as he prepared for the final blow. Rendon, panicking, stammered and tried to plead, but Theo was resolute. In one swift motion, he beheaded Rendon, completing his revenge. The system immediately congratulated Theo on completing his third tutorial quest. The audience remained frozen in disbelief, while Evelyn, watching closely, felt a sense of pride. In the crowd, a mysterious figure observed, clearly satisfied with what had transpired. As Rendon's head fell to the ground, the system informed Theo that he had exceeded the quest's objective and had earned a bonus reward. It asked if he would like to claim it. Without hesitation, Theo accepted, wiping the blood from his face as he received his reward. The audience couldn't believe what they had witnessed. The so-called imbecile had won, despite being an apprentice swordsman up against a mid-tier swordsman. They murmured in disbelief, questioning how such a thing had happened. Theo, looking down at Rendon's lifeless body, thought back to his previous life and couldn't believe he had suffered at the hands of someone so weak. He knew, though, that things would be different from now on. The system then notified him that his ability, Observation, had been activated as a reward, along with an additional reward of 1 year's worth of magic power. He was amazed to receive a full year's magic power, but was curious about what exactly observation was. Caught up in his thoughts, Theo didn't notice someone approaching from above. Suddenly, a figure landed on the stage with a deafening crash, shattering the floor beneath them and leaving Theo in shock. As the dust cleared, Theo looked back in horror to see none other than Julius Ragnar, the demon dragon and commander of the white-armored dragon cavalry. Panic flooded Theo's mind as he realized who Julius was and wondered how long he had been watching. The knights in the audience were equally stunned. They shouted in awe, recognizing Julius as one of the 9 dragons, the commander of the white armored dragon cavalry. Meanwhile, Evelyn, more frustrated than surprised, muttered about how her commander had completely destroyed the floor and wished he could enter more normally. Theo, now face to face with one of the strongest men on the continent, felt his panic rise. As Julius approached, Theo froze in terror, especially when he saw the fierce glare in Julius's eyes. However, Julius suddenly broke into a loud, booming laugh, catching Theo off guard. With a soft pat on Theo's back, Julius complimented him, saying the duel had been exciting and impressive, confusing Theo even further. Julius continued, expressing his surprise at Theo's abilities. He asked if the student had truly surpassed the master, then realized it might be a bit disrespectful since Theo had killed Rendon. Still, Julius shrugged it off, remarking that a man like Rendon likely deserved it. Laughing, Julius dismissed the thought and, with enthusiasm, grabbed Theo by the shoulder, offering him a position in the white armored dragon cavalry. Theo was shocked by the offer, while Evelyn smiled knowingly from the sidelines. The knights were in disbelief. They couldn't fathom how the imbecile of Ragnar had been scouted into the elite white armored cavalry. Despite Theo's victory, they didn't think it warranted such an honor. Remington, standing nearby, turned to a fellow knight, asking if there had ever been a case where an apprentice swordsman, especially one who hadn't even undergone the awakening ceremony, had been scouted. After a moment's thought, the man replied that he had never heard of such a case. Remington agreed, certain it was unprecedented, as it was impossible to gauge someone's true potential while their mana hall remained closed. Even if their swordsmanship was excellent, they could lack magic power, which made it risky to recruit them. Remington couldn't understand how even someone like Julius could see such potential in Theo. To everyone's shock, Theo declined Julius's offer. He stared at Julius seriously, causing the commander to fall silent, speechless. Remington, Evelyn, and all the knights watching were equally confused, unable to comprehend why Theo had rejected such an opportunity. The entire training ground fell into stunned silence as they stared at the 2 figures on stage. In the days that followed, gossip about Theo Ragnar spread rapidly. People were stunned by the news that the so-called imbecile had killed his own master. Many concluded that Rendon must have been weak for such an event to happen. What shocked people even more was that Julius Ragnar, the demon dragon himself, had tried to recruit Theo into the white armored dragon cavalry after witnessing the duel, only for Theo to decline because he felt his skills weren't yet enough. Word quickly spread that Theo was a humble Ragnar, a rare quality that left many surprised. Meanwhile, at Camellia Palace, Emil Ragnar, the Lady of Camellia and Mother of Action, expressed her frustration, saying that things had become complicated and she couldn't believe Theo had killed Rendon. Ed, her brother, calmly reassured her, reminding her that Rendon had been assigned to Theo specifically because of his poor skills. Emil agreed, stating that the death of someone like Rendon wasn't important to them. However, her real concern was that Julius, the demon dragon, had personally reached out to Theo, and to make matters worse, Evelyn had apparently ordered it. This meant they could no longer interfere by assigning Theo a new master. Emil explained that if Theo started standing out, it would become much harder for them to take control of Rose Palace. At that moment, the door to her room opened, and Action entered, asking what she meant by standing out. He confidently told his mother not to worry, assuring her that the clan head wouldn't take an interest in Theo, so their plan could proceed as usual. Emil asked Action if he understood that the best way to take control of Rose Palace without offending the clan leader was for Theo to remain powerless. Action reassured her, saying that Theo was still powerless and that there was no way someone like him could have changed much. He also reminded them that Evelyn and Julius had always been drawn to underdogs. Ed, however, sternly cautioned Action not to make any rash decisions. Ignoring the warning, Action reached for the table and declared that, since his mother and uncle were so concerned, he'd play with Theo a little and remind him of his place. The next day at the training ground, after their session, Evelyn praised Theo for his progress. He thanked her, remarking on how much better it was to learn from a proper master like her. Evelyn responded that it would have been even better if he had joined the white armored dragon cavalry, and she asked him why he had declined the offer. Theo admitted to himself that he did have some regrets about turning down the cavalry, especially since it had been his dream in his past life. However, joining now would limit him too early. He thought about the privileges that would come to the top performer of the awakening ceremony, something that far surpassed joining the cavalry. He told Evelyn that he didn't want special privileges and still felt he wasn't ready, but he was satisfied with her training for the ceremony. Evelyn accepted his answer and mentioned that Commander Julius would likely be disappointed. Curious about Evelyn, Theo activated his observation ability. He saw that she was 24 years old, held the title of former deputy commander of the white armored dragon cavalry, and was a high-rank swordsman. Her current status showed that she admired his humility and character, felt energized from teaching him, and missed the cavalry. Theo smiled, realizing how useful his observation ability was, and he felt pleased to discover that Evelyn was genuinely happy to teach him. Suddenly, a young man approached, excusing himself and introducing himself respectfully as Sybil Drea from the Southern Inspection Post. He explained that he needed to discuss something with Theo. Confused, Theo noticed that Sybil looked intimidating, so he activated his observation skill again. The system revealed that Sybil Drea was 17 years old, held the title of Dunce of the Southern Inspection Post, and was also an apprentice swordsman. Sybil's rank was loyalty, and his status showed a strong admiration for Theo and a desire to spar with him, which left Theo shocked. He couldn't believe that someone with such a serious expression was eager to spar with him. At that moment, the system displayed that Theo's final tutorial quest had begun, to discard the title Imbecile of Ragnar with a completion goal of 100%. It also showed that he had already reached 28%. Sybil then admitted that he wished to follow Theo, acknowledging that he had ignored him in the past. He also believed the title Ragnar's Imbecile suited Theo perfectly, which made Theo angry as he instinctively lifted his sword. But before Theo could react further, Sybil sincerely explained that he had observed Theo coming out every morning to train harder than anyone else, and that the result of such effort was Theo's miraculous growth, something Sybil had seen firsthand. Recalling Theo's defeat of Rendon and his recruitment by the demon dragon, Julius Ragnar, Sybil declared that Theo had become his idol. Sybil confessed that, after being called the idiot of the Southern Inspection Post, he had nearly given up on himself, but seeing Theo gave him hope. Bowing deeply, with his sword raised above his head, Sybil begged Theo for the opportunity to clash swords with him. Normally, Theo would have doubted Sybil's true intentions, but after using his observation ability, he confirmed that Sybil was genuine. This was unexpected, but Theo realized that after taking down Rendon and the rumors of Julius's attention spreading, people driven by an inferiority complex would likely challenge him. What he didn't expect, however, was that some would actually want to follow him instead. He guessed that, at the very least, the pride of the Ragnar bloodline still held sway among people like Sybil. Theo understood that, eventually, he would need followers of his own if he were to become the head of the Ragnar clan. His fourth and final tutorial quest, Discard the Title Imbecile of Ragnar, was directly tied to this. Theo knew this was a title he had never been able to shake in his previous life, but this time, with new opportunities, he was determined to completely rid himself of it. Turning to Evelyn, Theo asked if they could have a moment. Evelyn, with a proud smile, agreed and encouraged him to show off his skills. Raising his sword, Theo formally introduced himself as Theo Ragnar, apprentice swordsman of Rose Palace, awaiting the awakening ceremony, and proudly named Evelyn Nereval as his master. Evelyn beamed at this. In response, Sybil introduced himself as Sybil Drea, apprentice swordsman of the Southern Inspection Post, and a practitioner of the Cure clan's swordsmanship, specializing in the quicksword. After the formal introductions, Theo suggested they have a good spar. Sybil immediately sprang forward, launching his sword at Theo. Theo easily blocked the attack, and Sybil noted how fast Theo was. Despite being known as the idiot of the Southern Inspection Post, Sybil was still confident in his speed. Sybil continued to swing at Theo, recognizing that his opponent's skills were indeed the real deal. Theo, blocking each of Sybil's slashes with ease, thought back to how, in his previous life, he would have struggled to fend off even a few strikes. With a powerful swing, Theo raised his sword and sent Sybil flying, effortlessly overpowering him. Sybil spat out in pain as he slammed into the floor, but instead of frustration, he smiled happily. Sybil praised Theo, acknowledging that he had lost to his young master, and thanked him for the opportunity, saying he had learned a lot from the spar. Theo raised his sword again, signaling that the duel was over, and told Sybil it was a good fight. Theo noticed his reflection in his shining sword and wondered if he could use his observation skill on himself. Curiosity piqued, he activated the skill. To his surprise, it worked, displaying a screen that read observing, Theo Ragnar. He was taken aback by the details it showed. His title was still Imbecile of Ragnar, and his talents included Player, Ragnar, Observation, and 4 locked talents labeled as Denied Access. His status indicated a strong yearning for the awakening ceremony. His level was 1, with the following stats: Strength 13, Dexterity 14, Vitality 12, Magic Power 190, Intelligence 11, and Luck -49. The system popped up, explaining that his stats were now perceivable, and all stats would be represented by numbers going forward. Theo noted his talents being categorized, and he wondered if completing more quests would unlock the 4 hidden abilities. He was pleased to see that he could personally check his stat values, especially noticing that his magic power was high, thanks to his past life's magic and the dragon heart. However, the negative luck stat puzzled him. He wondered if it meant he had been cursed and if all the bad luck from his previous life had stemmed from this. Deactivating his observation skill, Theo thought to himself that he needed to find a way to increase his luck. Just then, he heard people approaching from behind and turned to see several men watching him. Evelyn observed that although Rendon had been weak, he was still a mid-rank swordsman, and the fact that Theo had defeated him and received the approval of Julius meant that in Ragnar's rule of the strong society, people would either envy him or admire him. The group gathered behind Theo seemed to fall into the latter category. The knights had been shocked by Theo and Sybil's duel, confirming that the rumors were true. They wondered if they themselves could have blocked Theo's strikes had they been in Sybil's place. Among them, Audnallan, wanting to spar with Theo but unsure how to ask, stood silently. Theo used his observation ability on him and learned that Audnallan was 19 years old, held the title pillar of the Nallan Viscount, and was a low-rank swordsman. His talent was passion and perseverance, and his current status revealed a strong desire to spar with Theo. With a sigh, Theo called out to Aud, surprising him. Aud stammered, asking if Theo knew him, but Theo simply ordered him to come forward and suggested they spar. Aud, excited, raised his sword and eagerly replied that it would be an honor. He introduced himself as the third son of Viscount Nallan, trained in the swordsmanship style known as Double Ascension. Theo introduced himself in return as Theo Ragnar of Rose Palace, expressing hope that they would have a good fight. Both rushed at each other, their swords clashing in the middle, causing Theo's basic swordsmanship proficiency to increase. Aud quickly pulled his sword back, gaining momentum, and swung it forcefully toward Theo's side, nearly landing a strike on his neck. However, Theo blocked it just in time, pushing Aud's sword away, and his changing heart swordsmanship proficiency increased as well. Aud, stunned by Theo's skill, admitted defeat, stammering as he acknowledged his loss. The system informed Theo that he had gained Audnallan's approval, and his luck increased by 1 point. This left Theo wondering if gaining people's approval could improve his luck and if it also tracked his reputation. Additionally, the system showed that he had earned experience points. Theo slashed his sword forward, engaging with the next knight who wanted to fight him. Knowing he needed to keep pushing himself, he continued to defeat his opponents, one by one. After each victory, he earned their approval. Bennett Ramiro's approval increased his luck by 1, followed by Eric Morin, who also granted him an additional point of luck. He continued to battle, gaining the approval of Manfred Monbert, Manuel Noir, Viro Perink, and Daniel Raman, each victory adding another point to his luck. After defeating several knights, Theo took a moment to catch his breath. He asked who would be next, but when no one stepped forward, he opened his status window. Despite having fought so many, his quest progress had only increased by 1%. Confused, he wondered if it was because these knights already respected him to some extent. He began to suspect that in order to make significant progress, he needed to challenge stronger foes or prove himself in front of those who still looked down on him. A different kind of event was required. Suddenly, a voice from behind remarked on how exhausted he seemed and asked if he would be alright. Theo responded that he'd rest when necessary, but for now, he didn't need it. The man stepped forward, revealing himself as Remington Narcio, one of the 4 Hounds of the North, who then requested a spar with Theo. Theo was shocked. Remington was a member of the prestigious 4 Hounds of the North, which included Hulkus Lank, Ray Ragnar,